Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Laveria, and today we're going to talk about the Jinn, Shinto, and UFOs. Okay, this is a cool episode. I'm excited. I think you're going to like it. Okay, why the Jinn and why Shinto? Okay, well, Japan and Arabia, okay, late antiquity, early Middle Ages. We're talking about 7th century in the case of Arabia, 8th century in the case of Japan. These cultures had absolutely nothing in common and had absolutely no contact, right? The only thing they have in common is their shared humanity. Okay. But the Japanese and the Arabs were not in contact during this time. And so I think this is an interesting case study because I really think if you have two different cultures, okay, with nothing in common, different environments, right? The only thing they have in common is their shared human physiology, okay? And they're both describing the same kind of weird phenomenon, then that weird phenomenon is almost okay. So that's why I'm going to go over these two subjects today. Um, on the Japanese side, I'm going to focus on the tale of Urashima Taro. Now, for most people, Urashima Taro is a fairy tale. It's a kid's story, okay? But and I was really into it, and I got really interested in it because I have three little boys, and when you have small kids, you start reading fairy tales, and I was struck by how many notes this story hit with the UFO phenomenon. And so I started to dig deeper and I came to realize that it's not just a fairy tale. Okay. There is a shrine dedicated to Urashima Taro, who is the protagonist in the story. So he is a god in Shinto. And this shrine is actually 1,200 years old, right? Because the story is even older than that. And what's really interesting about this shrine is that it was built pointing toward the North Star. Okay. And later on, we'll see why that's relevant. Okay. So we're not just talking about fairy tales here. We're talking about Japanese religion in some sense when we're talking about this story. And I want to be very careful and make it very clear that in no way am I saying that Japanese people don't understand this story. But me, as an American who's into UFOs, I'm going to decode what it really means, right? I'm not doing that at all. Same thing with the jinn in Islam. In no way am I saying that me, who am a non-Muslim, right? I'm not a Muslim. I don't even read Arabic. In no way am I saying because I read a lot about UFOs, I'm going to tell you what the jinn really are. I'm not doing that either. What I'm doing is an exercise in maybe comparative religion or comparative literature and in trying to extract from, a grape juice on one hand and an orange juice on another hand, the water, the H2O, right? That they both are based on. Okay, because I think these two things are talking about the same very real human experience. Okay. And in no way am I saying that this is merely a fairy tale, nor am I saying that, oh my God, it's true history. It happened just as it says in the book. No, I'm not. Okay. We're not taking that approach. Okay. We're doing a comparative analysis, if you will. And at the end of the whole thing, I'm going to compare it all with the UFO phenomenon. And if you stick with me, I guarantee you it'll be worth it. So, my main source for the Urashima Taro story is not the modern version you may find in kids' books. I am going with what is either the oldest or second oldest version of the story from the Tango no Kuni Fudoki Itsubun. Okay. Um, the reason I say it's the oldest or second oldest is because the author of this paper gave it as his opinion that it's the second oldest. But nobody really knows. But what they do know for a fact is that it was written in the 700s, okay? And that it was an oral tradition before that. So it's older than the oldest paper it was written on, okay? Um, and so basically, that's my source. Basically, the one in the appendix of this paper. okay, that comes from the 700s. And that's relevant because remember, Islam comes on the scene in the 600s. Okay, so these, this story about Urashimataro is within 100 years of the advent of Islam. Also, in the Tango no Kuni Fudoki Utsubun, there are multiple stories like this. I'm just sharing you the most famous one. So keep that in mind as well. This is not the only such story in that text. There are others. Now, on to the story. Okay. So I'm going to just narrate my version. If you want to read it and pause, you can do that. But I'm just going to summarize what it says. Okay. A long time ago, there was a guy named Urashimataro. Okay. And basically, he was fishing one day and he wasn't catching any fish, but he did manage to reel in a turtle with a multicolored shell. And so he reels in this turtle, he puts it in his boat, and poof, it turns into a beautiful woman. Okay. So he asked the beautiful woman, "Oh my God, like what are you and what are you doing here?" And she said, "I found a guy that suits my fancy. I found some handsome man, and I want you to come back with me to where I live, to be my husband." Okay, I'm paraphrasing. And so basically, Urashima Taro agrees. She says, I'm like a supernatural being, I'm an immortal, and I want to take you to the land of the immortals to live with me. And so she uses her magical powers, okay, and she puts him to sleep. Okay. And the boat drifts to this island with this unbelievably amazing castle on the island. And so he wakes up and he walks with the beautiful woman, the immortal, into this magic castle on the island. And they're greeted by children. Okay. And the woman tells him, "Hey, don't worry about it. This first seven group of kids, those are the stars of the Pleiades. And the second group of kids, this other second group of eight children, these are the stars of the Hyades." So already you have this kind of stellar connotation to these beings, which is understandable given, the way that shrine was built, pointing toward the star. Now, she takes him to meet her parents. Okay, and then the dad tells him all about what it is to be an immortal and what life will be like living with the immortals. And they have this sumptuous feast, and there's these beautiful dancing girls, and it's like an awesome party. And then everybody kind of retreats, and they're alone, and they become husband and wife. And he was with them for 3 years, story says, living in this enchanted palace in the middle of the ocean. But after 3 years, he got homesick, right? He hadn't seen his family for 3 years. And so he wanted to go back. Obviously, he was torn because he loved his wife and his new home, and she loved him and didn't want him to leave. But he really felt this sense of, filial piety. He had to take care of his family. He had to go back to his parents. So everyone, the mortals, right? They bid him farewell. But she, the wife, she said, hold on a second. Don't give up on us quite yet. I'm going to give you this magic box. Okay. And whatever you do, whatever you decide to do, whether you decide to come back or not, do not open the magic box. Don't open the magic box. That's the only thing you have to do. Whether or not you come back or not, just don't open the box. And so she takes off, right? She uses her magic powers and puts him back to sleep. And the boat drifts back to his village, right? And he gets out of the boat. He wakes up, gets out of the boat, and he doesn't recognize anything in the village. Okay, nothing is like it was when he left. And he starts looking, asking around for his parents, and he can't find them. He talked to some people, and he says, "No, those people you're talking about are dead. They've been dead for decades." And he comes to realize that he the world has changed. I mean, the world time has sped up 100 years. Okay. So he felt like he was on the island with the immortals for only 3 years, but really 100 years had passed. And nobody he knew before was still alive. And, he was distraught about this. And the locals told him, yeah, we have this story, there was a guy 100 years ago that went fishing and he never came back. And he's like, that was me. So he was distraught and he didn't think, and he opened the box and poof, he turned into an old man. Okay. And then, so he's an old man now, right? He's near death. And the story ends with a lament, right? This romantic lament of lost love and how he wishes he could be with his immortal wife again in the land of the immortals, and how he regrets having left and that sort of thing. And that's the oldest version or second oldest version of the Urashima Taro legend. Now let's talk about the Jinn. And as I talk about the Jinn, you'll understand why. Okay. This book by Ahmad H. Shakir is all about the Jinn. And the Jinn are interesting. In the Islamic great chain of being, they're below angels, right? You'll notice the angels are number one. Okay, so Allah, God, the God he's not comparable to anything or anyone. So he's not even on the list, right? He's like above the list. He's beyond the list, right? But in terms of beings that Allah, that God has created, the number one are the angels. That's the best. Those are the most powerful. And then below them you have the jinn, and then below them you have the human beings, and then the land animals, the sea animals, etc. Right? And the jinn, there are two kinds. There's good jinn and bad jinn. So if you're Christian and you think, oh, angels and demons, oh, angels and jinn, no, 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 no. In Islam, jinn, there are two kinds, good ones and bad ones, right? In Christianity, there are only bad demons. Okay. But what are the jinn made out of? Okay, it says here the jinn are among the creatures that Allah created. Allah created angels, jinn, mankind, etc. And the jinn are interesting. Uh, the jinn can take on forms and change shapes. They can take the form of snakes, scorpions, horses, cattle, sheep, birds, and other animals. Surprisingly, they can appear in human form too. Okay. So that's a lot like Kamehime, the wife of Urashima Taro, right? What powers do the Jinn have? The Jinn have the power to move fast and the power of carrying heavy things, that sort of thing. Um, Jinn have the power to rise up to high places outside the Earth's orbit to steal information. Okay. So the Jinn are capable of flying into space. So that's very interesting too, because remember those children that greeted Urashima Taro, seven of them were the stars of the Pleiades. Eight of them were the stars of the Hyades, but they're on this island on Earth, which means they're going up and down, right? So that's interesting too. The Jinn can go into space and they can come down to Earth. And like Kamehime, the wife of Urashima Taro, they can take the form of animals and human beings. Interesting. Um, Jinn are frequently present at nightfall. It's very common in terms of the UFO phenomenon. Okay, most UFO sightings happen at night. Where is the headquarters of the Jinn? Okay. The main headquarters of Jinn is on the sea. Okay. So the chief Shaitan, talking about the bad Jinn, gives orders to his soldiers to move to the land to advise people to do all types of crimes and mischief. Okay. So that's another interesting parallel with the Urashima Taro story, that the headquarters of the Jinn are at sea. And Kamehime and her family of immortals, they lived on an island in the middle of the sea. Okay. In a beautiful castle, right? Do the Jinn marry and have children? Yes, they do. Can human beings and Jinn intermarry? Yes and no. Depends on how one looks at it. So that's very interesting. So human beings and Jinn can and cannot intermarry. Depends on how you look at it. But the Jinn can marry and have kids. So There are multiple kinds of jinn, and most interestingly, as we'll see later, the jinn were created from smokeless fire. Okay, so that's what it says in the Quran, that the jinn were created from smokeless fire, and that'll be more important later on in the episode. Now, let's talk about UFOs. Let's talk about the free study. Okay. The single largest study on close encounter phenomenon using more than 4,000 UFO contactees, right? They had to do an online questionnaire, and it was very methodical, right? There were, simple like questions, but then there were essay questions, and those took hours to complete, and then there was a timer to make sure these people just weren't like cut and pasting stuff, right? This stuff was very well done and very scientific and meticulous, right? Um, but what's interesting with the free study when it comes to close encounter phenomenon, um, it's one thing that the free study revealed is that approximately 84% did not want their close encounters to end, right? And even in the abduction cases, right, 60% of those who had perceived being abducted, that is to say, taken and relocated to another location, like Urashima Taro was, okay, 60% of those did not want their close encounters to end. Okay. Remember, Urashimataro was happy on that island for 3 years. Okay. And at the end of the story, he regrets having left. Okay. So that's very interesting. Another thing that's interesting is um, of the people who were taken to another place, okay, 47% of them believe they entered an unearthly world. Okay. Now let's look into that. Okay. Quoting the free study. We also asked the question, did you ever have contact with NHI, but you were not in a 3D dimensional reality, i.e., you were not in a perceived physical location such as an Earth, on a planet, on a ship, etc., but instead, you perceived yourself in a matrix type of reality? Of the 1,500 individuals who answered this question, 749 agreed that they had a close encounter with a non-human intelligence in a matrix-like reality. Okay. Unlike the stereotype associated with mainstream ufology that alien abduction researchers that all types of contact with a UAP related NHI must be associated with a craft or with a forced abduction. In fact, more individuals have been taken and relocated to a matrix-like reality where they then interact with NHI than individuals who have been taken to a UAP craft, or even individuals who stated that they had been abducted. So, in terms of people who had a close encounter with a non-human intelligence, okay, going into a matrix-like reality was more common than going into a spaceship. Okay. Now let's look into that. What does that mean, matrix-like reality? Well, here are two really big takeaways. You can pause it and read all of these, but I highlight two. While in this matrix-like type of reality, did you seem to enter some other unearthly world? 70% of them said yes. Okay. Unfamiliar and strange place, and was 30%, and then 40% said mystical or unearthly realm. Now, here's the other one. While in this matrix type of reality, the time seemed to speed up or slow down. 76% agreed the time was altered. 11% of them said it went faster or slower than usual. And 65% of them said time stopped or lost all meaning. That's very interesting in terms of the Urashima Taro story, right? Because remember, he was on that island for 3 years, but really 100 years had passed, right? He lived 3 years on the island. He leaves the island, goes back to his town in Japan, right? And 100 years had passed. Okay. And, it showed, right? Because once he opened that box that he was told not to, boom, he suddenly aged 100 years, right? Very fascinating. With regards to the Matrix like reality thing, the most common type of being was human looking. Again, Kamehime and the little star children and her parents, they look like people. Um, Now, going back to the jinn, remember? According to the Quran, the jinn were made from smokeless fire, right? So human beings were made from the dust of the earth, just like the Bible says. Okay, there's a hadith where the Arabian prophet said that like humans were made from light. Okay, I mean not light. Angels were made from light. Okay, angels were made from light, humans from the dust of the earth. And the Quran says that the jinn were made from smokeless fire. Now, fire is a plasma. Okay. What's interesting is that in terms of the close encounter phenomenon, the most common phenotype for non-human intelligence is so-called energy being. So the energy being is the most common type of non-human intelligence reported by these, 4,000 plus close encounter experiencers. Human is right up there, right? So, between human, short gray, and energy being, there's a spread here that has, that's 4%, right? Less than a 5% difference between the three. So it's kind of a wash in terms of which is most common. But, energy being is just as, practically just as common as human, which is just as common as short gray. So that's very interesting in terms of the Quran, right? When it says that the jinn are made from smokeless fire, from plasma, right? Which is the fourth state of matter above. So here's my question to you, the viewer. And if you haven't by now, please like and subscribe. That's how these videos become more visible to other people who might like them. I like making them. I like watching them. So if you're like me, you feel the same way, and that means there are other people who would feel the same way. So please like and subscribe. But here's my question to you. Are these three legendarium? Okay, I'm calling them legendariums. Okay. The UFO phenomenon, the close encounters, the jinn and Islam, and these immortal, these kami in Shinto. And the kami is a very kind of fuzzy word. Kami is, depending on who you ask, kami essentially is anything worthy of worship. Okay, so the sun is a kami, the emperor is a kami, God, the first cause is a kami, and even like a great athlete is considered a kami. Okay, if people decide to pray to him, right? Um, you know, so are we talking about three different legendarium with three different sources, right? Three different causes, right? So we have the Urshimataro legend and other legends of immortals interacting with humans and having romance with humans. We have the UFO phenomena, and then we have Jinn in Islam. So are these three different kind of legends? Do they have three different causes? Are they completely unrelated? Right? That's one possibility. Or do they have a common cause, right? So if you go back to Monsters of California, sometimes it takes an artist to say in, art what it would take volumes to say in a more scholarly book, right? Is there one cause between these three things, right? One, and you have human beings on two different continents and in two different millennia, right? Um, Describing the same kind of thing using the limitations of their language and worldview. Okay, that's also a possibility. If there is one common cause for all three of these things, um, is it the collective unconscious of Carl Jung? Right? Is there a Jungian explanation for this? The collective unconscious, that these are kind of archetypes that exist within the human psyche and they manifest themselves in three different ways, or aliens, right? And when I mean aliens, I mean non-human intelligence, okay? Regardless of where they come from, okay? Or when they come from, okay? Or is it some combination of the two, right? Some combination of the non-human intelligence, the Jungian archetype, man, and these two things are kind of, I don't know, playing off each other and then being manifest in, the legendarium of three different cultures, three different civilizations, right? You don't know. And I'll leave that for you to discuss in the comments if you be so kind. But again, we got something here, guys. Okay. I go back to the first one of my first slides, right? If two completely different and unrelated cultures on different sides of the planet with no contact are describing the same weird kind of stuff, it's because that weird stuff is real. Okay. Um, I just think we should respect pre-modern people more and give them credit and understand that they understood more than modern people give them credit for. We do stand on their shoulders. And also, I think it's so interesting how, whether you're talking about the Jinn or things like kami in these Japanese legends, um, what we're describing looks a lot like the modern close encounter phenomenon. Okay. So take that to the bank. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. What do I think? I think this last slide is probably what's happening here. I think there is a combination. I think there is I won't say there's a single cause. I think there's something's happening um, with the collective unconscious. Okay. And whatever's happening involves the collective unconscious. It also involves a non-human intelligence. And I think that um, DeLong, DeLong piece of art explains it better than anything else, in my opinion. Could be wrong, but you know, Monsters of California, like I think this explains it better than anything. So that's why I affectionately call it the DeLong mandala. So, anyways, that's it for today. As always, remember, um, consciousness is not classified. Your consciousness is not classified. Learn to meditate. Learn some other kind of contemplative practice, some kind of prayer, hell, ceremonial magic. I don't care. As long as you're not breaking the law, explore your consciousness and you'll understand more about the UFO phenomenon than by any other way.